Chapter 1: The Judge and the Auras. Judge Raymond Elizondo sat confidently and intently in his seat within the courtroom. The prosecution is pitching their closing statement at the moment, but Raymond doesn't really need either the prosecutor or the defense attorney to know whether or not the defendant is guilty. No, because he has a secret, and this secret has been helping him move up the ranks quickly in his career. What is this secret? Well, you see, Judge Elizondo happens to be able to see auras around people, particularly the people relying on his verdict and judgment on sentencing. To him, it's abundantly clear when someone is guilty or innocent. When a defendant is truly innocent, there's always a bright, constant, clear shine around them. It's almost as if there is a bright white light shining directly onto the defendant, and they are in ultra-high definition, whereas everything else is just standard definition. Kind of like when a camera focuses on something or someone, and the background isn't quite as clear. Now, when a defendant is actually guilty of whatever they have been charged with, there seems to be a strange, distorting kind of shimmer surrounding the person. It's almost as if all around the defendant there is this huge heat source, causing the air around them to be heated up so much as to produce the distorting heat waves you might see rising off of the hot asphalt in an Arizona summer. Even though this is the case, and he has this special ability, he still goes along with the usual show, because if he were to share this strange little secret, people would think he's crazy. They would surely throw him out of his position, and maybe even send him to a mental institution. Seeing as how his career has been taking off quickly, it seems like he's made the right decision in both using this unusual ability and keeping it a closely guarded secret. Now he's sitting here in the courtroom once again, waiting for the show to finish so he can deliver the judgment he already knows he'll make. So, given the evidence we've provided, Your Honor, we believe the defendant is not only guilty of possession of a controlled substance, but also guilty of having the intent to sell and distribute it, based on the amounts that they were found to have in their possession. I have no further comments to make, Your Honor. I believe the evidence clearly speaks for itself. Thank you, says the prosecutor, Mr. Eddie Thompson, as he walks back to his side and sits down. Eddie gathers up all of the documents lying on the table, taps them on the table to line them all up, and then puts them back into his briefcase. The defense lawyer, Mr. Victor Broughton, stands up, approaches Judge Elizondo, and begins to say his closing remarks. But Raymond is looking directly at the shifting, distorted aura shimmering around the defendant. Sorry, Victor, but this guy is as guilty as can be. Doesn't really matter what closing remarks you have to say, because I definitely see jail time in the defendant's future, Raymond thinks while looking intently at the defendant, or rather at the aura emanating from the defendant like waves of heat from a stove. And that's why we ask that you consider the entirety of the circumstances surrounding the case, Your Honor. Yes, my client has had a troubled past and clearly has a substance abuse problem, but he is by no means a drug dealer or distributor. Thank you, finishes Victor, walking back to his side and taking a seat with a confident look on his face. The defendant leans over to talk with Victor, and there is some whispering, and the defendant nods his head and mouths, "Thank you so much." Finally, the show is about to be concluded, but there is one more act left to play. It's Raymond's turn to put on his acting face now. He has to at least make it look like he's actually considering all of the information that the prosecution and defense has just provided. Otherwise, people might start to catch on that his mind was already made up the moment the defendant walked in the door, and who would trust that judgment? That would reek of bias and prejudice to everyone. And admittedly, Raymond completely understands and would feel this way too if he were in their shoes and didn't know about his ability. Hence, the need to put on a good show for the people. Judge Elizondo sat there, wearing his most convincing look of contemplation on his face, with his elbows on the table and his fingers slowly tapping together. Sometimes, this is the hardest part of the job, not making the actual judgments. That's actually the easy part, thanks to his uncanny ability to see these auras. But finding a convincing way to explain why he is making this particular judgment, that's the hard part. He can only use what information has been presented to him as his reasons. And lately, this has become even more difficult given his quick rise through the ranks and taking on more difficult cases. Nonetheless, he delivered his verdict after acting out much internal deliberation. Based on all of the evidence provided, I find the defendant guilty of all charges, Raymond said in his most confident and authoritative voice. Immediately, surprised murmuring can be heard throughout the courtroom, and naturally, a shocked and hurt look on the defendant's face can be seen. Victor happened to look shocked as well, but also a bit concerned. Hadn't he presented a convincing case for his client not to be convicted of the intent to distribute illegal substances? Order, please, order in the courtroom. Now, although I find the defendant guilty of all charges, let the record show that I will take into consideration all of the defense's remarks when determining the sentencing for these charges. This soothed the murmuring in the courtroom, but only a little. Despite this less than agreeable response from the courtroom, Judge Elizondo stood and left the courtroom, heading back to his office. Raymond shrugged off his black gown and let out a deep sigh as he sat down, interlocked his fingers, placed his hands behind his head, and leaned back in his office chair. He closed his eyes, and immediately a river of thoughts began gushing through his mind. Soon he would have to serve as a judge for some upcoming cases that are very high profile, much higher profile than he had served on before, in fact. While the prospect of launching his career even higher into the atmosphere of success with these upcoming cases seemed like an incredible opportunity, he couldn't help but feel a bit worried about how he would defend his judgments. Recently, it's been more and more difficult to portray a convincing response, given the shocked looks and surprised murmuring after the court case he had just finished presiding over. People just don't understand. And they wouldn't understand even if he explained his ability. I guess this is just a small price to pay. I shouldn't be complaining about feeling a little discomfort when making a tough judgment. I'd be doing the city a disservice if I wasn't using this incredible ability, he thought, watching thoughts swim around in his mind. Then he chuckled to himself. Tough judgment. Now that's funny. The difficult part has nothing to do with the judgment. To be continued. See you next time.